When he became Uganda's president in 1986, Yoweri Museveni was an immediate U.S. favorite, according to David Throop with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, here in Washington.
Museveni was seen as a great improvement on former Ugandan leaders. He accepted structural adjustment as proposed by the International Monetary Fund and the Bank. Museveni was seen as a positive force in East African and wider regional politics.
Nia Quetta is the founder of the Democracy and Conflict Research Institute in Ghana. He says U.S.-Uganda relations, despite recent strains, continue to be good for at least one good reason.
Washington and Kampala both have the same enemy, Al-Qaeda. And because of that, President Obama sent Eric Holder, the Attorney General, to see Mr. Museveni. A host of other American officials have gone.
Quetta says the United States should be far more critical of Museveni. He says Museveni rigged the last election and is trying to rig the next one by repeatedly arresting and beating opposition leader Kizza Besigye.
This is a former presidential candidate. If there were real elections, he would come close to being president. The State Department said he should be respected. Museveni didn't respect it. So Museveni actually is thumbing his nose at the U.S.
Quetta says the United States has often coddled African strongmen like Yoweri Museveni.
The U.S. has continued a policy it had under the Cold War of embracing dictators he called friendly tyrants. You have Mobutu Sese Seko of the country now called Congo. He renamed it Zaire. He was a dictator who ran the country into the ground. Then you go to Tunisia. The dictator just gotten rid of Ben Ali. He's an American-supported dictator. You go to Egypt. President Mubarak, who has just been gotten rid of and is now being charged with corruption and is in hospital. He was an American-backed dictator. You come to Sub-Saharan Africa. Hissène Habré in Chad. President Reagan supported him. And now the man is being tried for killing tens of thousands of his opposition. He's being tried. You go to Liberia, Samuel Doe was supported by President Reagan. Jimmy Carter supported Siad Barre, the dictator, in Somalia because he persuaded them that he's fighting communism. Paul Kagame in Rwanda. Former President Clinton is seen as a friend of Mr. Kagame. He's a dictator. You have Mr. Museveni, who we've been discussing. He's a dictator. You have Ethiopia and Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia. He's an American-backed dictator.
All of these are direct consequences of Cold War competition.
Throop says the negative consequences of the Cold War are one thing, colonial rule in Africa is another. He says blaming colonial power mischief for the rampant poverty in Africa is simplistic. And now, with an ever more economically powerful China, this kind of hindsight, he says, is mostly irrelevant.
It's almost out of date now to worry too much about the economic relationship that existed in the 1960s to the 1980s between Africa and the West. I am perhaps slightly more concerned about the extent of economic exploitation which is beginning to gather momentum from China.
But for Africa to prepare for any challenges China or any other country might present in the future, Africans must, says Nia Quetta, understand the challenges of the past.
There are critics who say, well, colonialism is over. If you talk about colonial influences on Africa, you are just making excuses for bad African leadership. But that argument is false, and a good way to understand that it is false is to look at the United States. The United States had a civil war for 4 years, and the best American analysts will tell you that if you want to understand the United States, you have to understand the Civil War, because it was over slavery, it was over states' rights, it was about race.
And Quetta says the issues of race and states' rights are still with Americans 150 years almost to the day after the start of their Civil War. I'm Todd Groshans, VOA News.